He is, of course, a research fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institution, a professor of classics and humanities at California State University, author of 9 books, numerous articles, and his latest book, The Wages of Appeasement. Now, Professor, before we go, and thank you for the overtime, one question. Why do we have progressives, leftists ignore Islamism as we know it, okay? Actual ideologies and religion that in the doctrine are threats in the sense that there's an interpretation that justifies these heinous acts, and it's clear, it's black and white. They even point to it. They don't say it's poverty. No, it's not poverty. It's not even Gitmo. It's this. And they seem hostile to, they seem to be willfully blind to that, yet a Judeo-Christian foundation that is the remedy for women's rights that they're so concerned with rights as we all are. We don't want to see women stoned. We don't want to see homosexuals hung. I mean, why do we have that willful blindness?
Well, you have a couple of reasons. One, we touched on before the break. I mean, people have a narrative. Your narrative, my narrative, probably most of your listeners' narrative comes from Christianity and the whole Western tradition. Mm-hmm. Their narrative comes from someplace else. The narrative then determines the fact. The facts don't determine the narrative. And so it doesn't fit the narrative because it doesn't make us the villains. And the point of the narrative is that we are the villains. And so you do whatever you have to do. Just as they did in communism, for the whole 20th century, the fellow travelers, the guys, apologizing for Lenin and Stalin, et cetera. It's kind of the same thing. Don't discount either just the massive amount of ignorance, particularly ignorance of history, of a lot of people that are presumably better educated. That clip you played from that guy, I forget who he was.
Torre, yes.
Yeah. That's just so massively ignorant that if you try to correct him, you'd have to start with the alphabet, to get him up to speed. So there's a lot of these people that are just afflicted with massive amounts of historical ignorance and philosophical ignorance in the sense that, they don't know how to make an argument that's coherent based on evidence. One last point is Christopher Dawson, I think, the great Catholic historian, said early in the 20th century, because this was all going on then, beginning then, that our tradition, our Judeo-Christian, Greco-Roman tradition, which together forms the West, is like a huge cultural bank account. It's a huge amount of capital, right? Mm-hmm. And starting in the early 20th century, we stopped replenishing that capital. And what we've been doing is we've been living off of it. And you don't need a PhD in economics to know that if you live off all of your capital and you're not creating more capital, you eventually will run out of that capital and you will go bankrupt. And this is what we are doing. And it's disguised from us because we still have the capital. We have freedom of speech. We have equal rights, gender rights, et cetera, all these sorts of things, as you mentioned. We still have that. So we think, oh, well, that's always going to be there. Just like a spendthrift heir thinks, oh, I inherited all this money, it's always going to be there. But then someday it isn't there. And then, you realize, wait a minute, where did it all go? And that's when a civilization really starts to decline.
And on Friday, we are going to be following up with you. See, this is how I do it. I ask him to stay on. We've gone overtime, and now I'm getting him on Friday. I'll try. We'll try for you. Professor, thank you for the extra time. Really great articles. Bravo, man. Great job, sir. Thank you. Take care. That is Professor Bruce Thornton, Hoover Institute Research Fellow. It is really absolute joy. This is why one of the many reasons I do nothing but truth is to speak with learned folks like that and talk about their work. I will post both of those articles because they are must-reads in the discussion that we're having. And I want to go to the core of it. I want to go to the how. I want to go to the why and attempt to understand it. Sometimes I'm clumsy and inartful in that way, but I think you get where I'm coming from, don't you? Do you feel me? I hope you do, because we're in real trouble. We're in real trouble in this country, and what he said in his closing statement there, it speaks to that, the replenishment. We're tearing down everything that has made our country great. What's great about AFR talk is that you Dan the Mancilia will explain it to you in the financial issues. You'll get Tim in today's issues with Ed discussing it in a conversational way, but bringing on authors and discussing it in a way that they're addressing the issues of the day. And that's what happens on AFR Talk, addressing the issues of the day. You got apologetics, Dr. Alex McFarland and Pastor Bert Harper, and then Tony Perkins. And Washington Watch, so you're going to get the pulse of somebody who's been there and understands it and is there and gets it from the actuals. You got it all. Lock it in. And I say that, and I'm speaking to the lineup because it's great that you're here, and this is part of it. This is part of the change. I really believe that, because it's not going to come through a change in Washington by electing somebody. It's just not going to happen that way. One simple election and everything changes. You can change the structure, but if you don't capture the hearts and minds, and that's what I love about the arena, the discussion. Now, some of you say, well, Crane, you just assailed the left. No, well, I just told the truth about the left. The left is driving us into the ditch. They're not driving us, they're driving us into the ground. And it's very clear that results don't matter. Common sense doesn't matter. I played for you John Kerry, our Secretary of State, denying the dangers that are clearly outlined by the release of these Gitmo terrorists. And so you could sit there and say, oh, well, they may be. Oh, wait a second. On September 12th, would you have let those people go in light of the most horrific attack on our soil? But we had it going on through the 90s. And here's my point to that. My point is that just because we get distance in time away from an event doesn't change the facts which brought that event. It doesn't change the people's ideology of who embraced that event and cheered it or funded it or was taught that that is the way that change happens for them. If you read the Muslim Brotherhood's project, they clearly outline they're going to use and manipulate, and Bill Federer has done some great work on this, but manipulate in any way possible the politics of a particular area in order to get the system to lock in what they want, which is a worldwide caliphate and Sharia law. That's it. It's not some conspiratorial notion. It's Wahhabism. It is what's being taught in Saudi Arabian madrasas. This is what they teach. This is what is known. And by the way, when they talk about wiping Israel, the little Satan off the map, and the big Satan is us, they're serious. They're not building a nuclear reactor in the sense of for energy. They're sitting on the largest stores of oil and natural gas. I mean, they're rich. They're developing missile technology with Iran. Not Iran. Iran's doing that with North Korea. I mean, this is all out there. It's all understood from anybody who wants to recognize the threat. Now, do we want to live in perpetual, oh, I'm nervous, or perpetual war? Well, what does that mean? Because they're perpetually at war with us. Does that mean we deny the war? Do we say it's ended, it's over, we deny the facts? Hey, here, we're done. Cease hostility. No, they haven't. No, they're still going to drive to their goal. And sooner or later, they get strong enough to inflict damage, heaven forbid, more damage than they did before. And then we take notice. Now, it's our decision whether we arrest them right now, in the sense of arrest what they're doing, not physically arrest. I know that's an idea. Let's bring them to justice. No, I will say this again. The way to get rid or stop Iran is to get rid of the regime. You must get rid of the regime. Regime change is the way to go. Now, how that is accomplished, some people would give you two choices: invade or do nothing. That's asinine. So why don't we back that up a little and say, why don't we work with NGOs to undermine that government? Because the Iranian people are not the problem. It's the Iranian regime. I've spoken a lot about Islam, but I will also tell you that I have Muslim reformers on. who reject political Islam as we know it. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is one of them. Now, I would like inevitably, yes, I want Dr. Zuhdi Jasser to come to Christ, but I also want to outline the movement for you that there is a war within Islam of the interpretation of Islam and the rejection and reform of Islam. But if you can't speak honestly about that and you are called anti-Muslim merely for telling the truth about what's happening, what's being taught, you're never going to solve the problem. And then all of a sudden, after something heinous happens, we all sit there and we say, let's do this. And that's based on a feeling. Now, I understand that feeling because I still feel it and you still feel it. We all feel it when we see the destruction that these terrorists cause. But here's another part of their game plan. The terrorists, Islamic terrorists, is for us to identify what they are, what their doctrine is. They want us to speak in doublespeak. They don't want to because if we start identifying it and we say, you know what? We have Hassan, that was a terrorist attack, Fort Hood. Yeah, that was an Islamic terrorist attack. That's a problem. We got to identify that. We've got to take proper steps to protect ourselves from that, because if we don't, we're going to end up with more dead Americans or more dead Israelis or more dead innocents, more dead Muslims who are merely going to the store, their marketplace. Or we're going to see more human rights abuses, if you want to put it that way. But if you look at over half of the world's conflicts involve Islam. I mean, you got to start taking this stuff. And the only time people want to address it, it seems on the left, is when something happens and then they want to base their response on emotion. I don't want to base my response on emotion, folks. I want to base it on solving the problem. And quite frankly, you got to get honest to do that. And you got to be in a place to get honest. So you can't have somebody, even the commander-in-chief and leader of the free world, our president, President Obama, who loves straw men, say, invade or do nothing. You can't do that. You can, sure, but it has consequences. And one day, people are going to be pointing their finger of, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you do something? And just like it was with 9/11, we have a situation where we put in these policies, and political correctness leads us, not national security, not actual, but somehow you go off into these tangents where, I think I'll call it something else, or I won't identify it, or it's poverty that causes terrorism. And I'll keep saying that over and over again. And people don't like talking about war, so that's actually politically popular. If I talk about wars ending, I don't have to explain that they're either won or lost, fought to stalemates to a degree, and then there's still hostilities, and then you divide up the place. No, and so you get politicians who will do that, or they'll say, I don't really know what to do in Afghanistan. I think, we could pull out, ending the war is good. They don't take a stand to say, you know what, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go after the sources of terrorism. The number one state sponsor of terrorism is Iran, the Iranian regime. Now, some would come back at you and say, well, there's the Shia-Sunni split, blood elect, respectively. And then you have to say, well, tell me this. If there's such a big split, then why is 40% of Hamas's funding come from Iran? Iran is Shia, Hamas is Sunni. So tell me how that works. I'll tell you how. They come together. You know how they come together? Israel. They want to rid people of Israel. They want to rid the world of Israel. And that's just not going to happen. But here is the point I'm making. You talk about it, you face it, you trace it, and then you erase it. You go to the regimes, you go to the threats, and you deal with each one with the best strategy possible. And that is not invade or do nothing. But if a nation is buying that bunny stew, that baloney, and saying that's how we want to have a conversation, and then you get people like Torre or MSNBC's panel to talk about how poverty is causing it or Gitmo's causing it, no matter how much Tom Jocelyn dispels it, no matter how much we have people saying that's just simply not true, talking nonsense, and then smearing those who, well, I'll just speak for myself, smearing those to say, if I mention Islam being at the cause and the root and the doctrine that terrorists are using and justifying, and the schools within Islam, Robert Spencer talks about this and has detailed this and outlined it. the fact is, if you talk about the facts, then you're called some kind of hater. I'll tell you, the people that are so destructive, that are doing enormous harm to this country, you may not see it right now, but we, unfortunately, history tells us we are going to feel it if we don't change it. And the people that are talking so much about peace, are going to bring on HE double hockey sticks, folks. Because the enemy gets stronger when we don't identify it and, quite frankly, face it and defeat it. Crane Durham's nothing but truth. On the flip side, we have Pete Sepp, and President Obama wants to suspend the laws of basic economics. He's going to make government have 2 + 2 = 5. Crane Durham's nothing but truth, student loans, and more. AFR Talk.